Hey internets, so recently I hit that 50k subscriber milestone, which means yet another fun Q&A video. I got a ton of good questions this time, so it was a little hard choosing which ones to go over. So sorry if I didn't get to yours, as I tried to go with the ones that were deemed most popular and wouldn't take up too much time answering, so that way I could try to be fair to as many people as possible. But anyways, here we go. Starting with, what is your go-to method of addressing the idea of late-stage capitalism? So late-stage capitalism is kind of a meme thing to say. It's really just people blaming the problems of civilizational collapse and cultural decline in the West on capitalism. It's just another example of people blaming everything on capitalism rather than trying to actually understand what is going on. So that's usually what I see when I see someone complaining about late stage capitalism. It's just another example of the initial hindrance bias, where people are just kind of blaming whatever gives them the first pushback or the first hurdles in what they're trying to do, instead of digging deeper. Next up, oh yeah, for these that have more than one question, I'm just gonna pick one at random. So who are your favorite economists? I'd say I like Hoppe, obviously, and I like Mises. Another good one that's a little bit more mainstream, although technically still Austrian, would be Hayek. The reason I kind of recommend people understand Hayek and use Hayek is simply because he provides one of the easiest to understand explanations for why socialism doesn't really work. His idea on prices and how they convey knowledge and how prices are effectively a form of communication to others is one of the easiest to get for the normies explanation for why you can't actually have socialism, and at the very least you need the market to be as free as possible so that way that knowledge is properly conveyed. He's not the best economist to understand if you want to really understand why you need free market, but he is the easiest to understand. Next up, do you have any distinct religious beliefs? Oh, there's a good question there. I do, however, I make it a point not to make a big deal out of it. And the reason why is because most useful religious theology can be very easily translated into ideology and philosophy that other people can understand. You never want to use religion as your primary go-to reason for why you believe what you believe, because what happens when you do that is you end up sounding completely insane and unhinged to anybody who doesn't immediately share your exact same religious beliefs. And it also shows that you don't really understand that ideology or philosophy too well. For example, say someone said that I believe that X is true because my imaginary friend told me so. And then you ask him, okay, well, why does your imaginary friend believe that? And they say, oh, well, I don't know, but my imaginary friend told me so, and my imaginary friend knows everything, therefore it must be true. Even if said imaginary friend really does exist and really does know everything, and you assume that everything he says is true, the problem with that is that when you use that kind of reasoning, it shows that the person who believes in said imaginary friend doesn't really understand the reasons behind what they believe. It shows that they've never actually questioned it beyond their religious beliefs. In other words, religion can very easily come across as an appeal to authority fallacy, if you're using it as a justification for political positions. Anyways, next up, who is your favorite Fumo after Marisa? I'd say Cerno. It's really hard to compete with that level of smugness. Next up, should the government be able to enforce environmental regulations, particularly those concerning pollution of the air and water? So this is one of those that came really close to requiring its own video, but I'll just simplify it as best as I possibly can, because the answer is kind of a yes and no answer. But basically, laws dealing with the environment make sense when it's an issue of property rights. For instance, it makes sense for there to be a law against dumping toxic sludge into the river because that negatively affects the property of everybody else downstream. In other words, environmental issues can very easily violate the NAP. For instance, imagine if someone were to light a bunch of nukes off in one of those northern islands in Canada where absolutely nobody lives, to the point where it caused a thermonuclear winter. That would be a violation of the NAP, because by doing that you will have negatively affected the property of everybody else on the planet, without their consent, as most people do not consent to suddenly freezing to death. Environmental issues in general are just a good example of how the NAP is a little bit more far-reaching than most people realize it is. Now, as for whether or not the government should do it, the way I say it is that the state performing a necessary task is better than nobody performing a necessary task. So as long as there is a state, there should be some regards of environmental protections, but again, only in cases where it would violate the NAP. That may sound like a contradiction, but again, of course, it's only as long as the state exists. Next up, what are your views on the pragmatic approach to decreasing the state? For example, Milei as president of Argentina and libertarian parties as a whole. So the basic idea of the pragmatic approach is that it's not technically the most ethical, not always correct as if you were to go by natural law theory, But the problem with that is this idea of snapping your fingers and everyone becomes a natural law theorist. It's not realistic. People who say that are usually people who understand philosophy and ideology of libertarian thought, but don't understand human psychology. So realistically, getting libertarians in the various positions where they're actually able to either shut down corrupt agencies or privatize them is the most realistic path forward. Next up, what would be the best counter to all too common leftist Gish Gallop be? Well, first off, people on the right and the left can do the Gish Gallop. It's annoying whoever does it. And the answer to the Gish Gallops is to just call them out and then try to refute their central point. Pick the things out of their Gish Gallop that actually matter, and then refute those. That's actually what I'm going to be doing when dealing with the bad MPanda. And yes, I know it's MP not, I don't care. Bad Panda's more fun to say, because a lot of tanky Gish Gallopers specifically, what they love to do is they love to take data out of context while citing dozens upon dozens of studies, so that way you now have to expend much more effort to refute what they're saying, because now you have to go through dozens of 200-page academic papers to find out exactly what they're lying about. And with those people specifically, the best way to do it is to just point out some of their outrageous lies. As much as I don't like arguments that rely a little bit on personal attacks, when it comes to tankies who love to lie, you do just kind of have to discredit them and show just how outrageous their lies can be. So that way, when they continue to take data out of context, it eventually gets to a point where everybody who's paid attention no longer believes them. Which is what Bad Panda did, by the way. He told some outrageous lies. But I'll get to that later in another video. But TLDR, the way you deal with a Gish Galloper is you expose their most insane lies, and that way you defeat them by discrediting them. Because if you don't do that, they'll just keep finding new data to take out of context. Next question, why is your channel icon what it is? Where did it come from? It's basically just a drawing of my own eye. I have bright blue eyes and red hair. Secrets out. Next up, what is a common pitfall libertarians fall into either in their own ideology or when critiquing leftists? That is not understanding leftist ideology. You have to know how these people think in order to debunk how these people think. You also have to understand human psychology. Most people will simply support what they believe to be most personally beneficial to them. And that's just how human beings are. There's no real getting around it. And so a lot of people get roped into leftist economics because they think that having free stuff would personally benefit them. So you have to explain to them how free stuff actually makes the economy worse overall, and that they ultimately will have more access to stuff in a free market. Next up, will we ever get a 3-hour video on the follies of democracy? Probably, but it most likely is not going to be a 3-hour video. That one's actually in my pile of videos to do later, but is most likely going to be more around 10 to 12 minutes like most other videos. Because what I try to do on my channel isn't so much to go into extreme detail, I try to pack as much understandable arguments into as short amount of time as possible, so that way people have easy ways to explain things to others. I'm always asking myself the question, how do I convey this very complex idea in a way that anybody can understand it in less than 10 minutes or so, preferably even less than that. Because that is one way that a lot of left-leaning economics has right-leaning economics absolutely beat. Left-leaning economists, or as I like to sometimes say, economicists, they have a very easy, simple answer. Blame capitalism. And that's stupid and wrong, but it works. Because it's a simple, easy to understand answer. And it preys on people's feelings of being cheated by our current society. So it's very easy to understand, and people are very susceptible to accepting it. And so we have to come up with, okay, how do we counter this with easy to understand but correct answers of our own? Oh, another double question. What is your opinion on Ayn Rand and the Objectivists? Ayn Rand is a good introduction to libertarianism, but not the end-all be-all. She kind of exists before the Austrian school really came into being. So she's kind of what you'd consider Babby-level libertarianism. Objectivism, however, is very useful to understand because it provides a lot of good arguments against certain leftist arguments that aren't grounded in reality. Next up, bread tuber collage and why JREG is on it. Honestly, the collages I use are just memes. They're just popular memes. Try not to take those too seriously. A lot of times when I use memes, I'm just using them to convey simple ideas. Don't take them too literally. Although to be honest, that misunderstanding's kind of my fault for being lazy, so my bad. Next up, what is the best way to educate normies about liberty and libertarianism? Again, that's just finding ways to simplify complex answers. For instance, the Learn Liberty channel has a few really simple videos that are actually even easier for normies to understand than my videos. For example, the video from them on what if there were no prices is a really good, very simple explanation on the knowledge problem and how it relates to the economic calculation problem, which is kind of a basic introduction to why communism can never really work. And what's good about it isn't so much that it's complete, it's good because even a elementary school kid can watch that and get it. So we need more stuff like that. We need better pedagogy, basically. People shouldn't have to, nor should the normies be expected to read every single book written by, say, either Rothbard or Hoppe in order to understand libertarianism. Next up, where do you start to dissect an argument? How do you find fallacies? One is just studying reason and being aware of common reasoning mistakes. But for the most part, whenever I hear something that just doesn't add up, what I'll do is that I'll then examine it more closely, and then I'll find out why it doesn't add up. And usually one of two things will end up being true. Either A, I didn't fully understand it immediately, or B, there's some kind of fallacy or self-contradiction in it. Next up, how does libertarian/ANCAP philosophy handle internalizing negative externalities, i.e. societal impacts of alcohol, smoking, etc.? Okay, I know where you're going with this. This is another one that could, again, just use its entire own video, but the best way to simplify it is physical removal. This is actually a good explanation for why Hoppe is correct. A lot of those negative externalities show why libertarians need to understand that culture matters. Next up, why is the mainstream media still so influential when less people watch it than ever? Well, for one is that boomers still pay for cable, but the bigger reason is because they're subsidized. And the way the cathedral works kind of keeps them on life support, because that way they can use circular reporting to pretend like they still have some kind of credibility. Although one white pill is that it's probably not going to work for much longer. We actually have seen in the last 8 years or so, a lot of crappy media companies just kind of fall down the drain. Because even when being subsidized, as more and more people realize that they're full of crap, eventually a lot of these mainstream media companies just will run into the economic wall of reality. And they have no choice but to fold when that happens. Next up, another double question. What motivated you to create your channel and ideas for your videos? The main motivation is honestly I just saw too many political and philosophical influencers who were either liars or grifters, or just flat out not very smart. In some really sad cases, all three. And I just reached a breaking point where I could no longer live with myself not calling it out. For instance, there's a lot of breadtube channels out there that rely entirely on the equity fallacy as their entire platform for everything that they say, which is really bad for society because all it really does is spread this false notion of victimhood to the younger generation. And that kind of thinking is bringing very serious societal and cultural problems to the West. Next up, another multi-question. This one I will just go with 3. What is the best way to organize a minarchist state? Constitutional republic, constitutional monarchy, absolute monarchy, or something else? The best version of minarchism, I'm not a minarchist myself, but the best version would probably be libertarian monarchy, which is a form of monarchy that respects freehold, and then combine that with the city-state model. Me personally, I would prefer the cities themselves be privatized and there to be no king, because that way it doesn't contradict aggression. But if you have to do minarchy, then a world of 10,000 Liechtensteins would probably be the best way to do it. Next up, what is your opinion on city-states? Wait, I just answered this kind of in the previous question. Do you think this might be the most pragmatic method of creating a libertarian society? Well, again, if you have to do minarchy, sure. It is not the best method, though. Next question, should BB become more like Singapore? I see them as #1 on the Heritage Foundation ranking. Okay, so the thing with Singapore is that they are heavily subsidized, so they're not the absolute best way of doing things, but they are better than most places. Singapore's methods are just a simple, straightforward example as to why smaller city-states that practice somewhat of a free market tend to be better than just about everything else. That currently exists, anyway. There are potentially better things that can be done. Mainly Singapore, though, is just another really good example to use to show why communism just doesn't work. Because it's closer to what libertarians want than other systems, and extremely successful at what they do. At least in comparison to the rest of the world, they serve as really good examples or proof of concepts for everything else we're saying, even though it's not perfect. Next up, another double question. So which do you prefer more, Austrian School of Economics or Chicago School of Economics? I prefer the Austrian school, although you should learn a bit of Chicago school, because a lot of times the Chicago school, what they will do is they'll provide some decent empirical evidence for what the Austrian school has already figured out. It is always funny to beat empiricism at its own game. Next up, how does the libertarian philosophy deal with dangerous business practices like the 1900s meat industry? That is another one that probably needs its own video for a full explanation, but the short answer is that it is entirely possible to privatize the FDA, especially since the FDA isn't actually doing their job anymore. Next up, what are your thoughts on freedom tunes? Again, that kind of harkens back to what I was saying earlier about simplifying complex ideas. Freedom tunes isn't perfect, and they do kind of bleed a little bit too much into conservatism every now and then, but they do provide a lot of really simple, easy to understand explanations for free market policies, in a way that people actually find funny. So overall, I like them. Next up is the algorithm question. What do you think about algorithm as the method towards anarcho-capitalism? Well, algorists, what they're doing could kind of work, However, the one thing I have to say about algorithm is that a lot of them say you shouldn't vote. That I disagree with. Algorists should vote if they want to use that as a strategy for libertarianism, and they should vote for things that make it easier to practice algorithm. Because one problem with voting is that if you don't vote, what might happen, other people will vote to take your rights away. So if you want to go the algorithm route, you should still vote against anything that would get in your way, which generally always involves voting for principal positions anyway. Next question, another multi, we'll go with one. Marx's private versus personal property distinction without a difference. Well, the thing is, there is no distinction. It's a completely subjective distinction. That's actually one of the major problems with Marx's philosophy, is that private and personal property is a meaningless buzzword. Any personal property can become private property at any time, so long as you find a way to make money out of it, which can happen with anything at any time. So it's really just ends up being another of the many refutations of Karl Marx. Next question, what channels for similar content do you recommend? There isn't really a lot of similar content on YouTube to what I make. There's content that's kind of close, but not quite the same mission. For instance, there's SFO, but he's more of an enlightened centroid than a libertarian anything. We just have similar styles of video. So what I'll do instead is I will once again recommend MRH Legacy. Some people who've been subscribed to me for a long time have probably already heard me make this recommendation before, but I gotta say it again because still a lot of people don't know about him. His videos are a lot like mine, except much, much longer, but not nearly as many. Oh, you know what? That's actually another good question, so I'll answer the second one too. You mentioned once that you turn PDF books into audiobooks. How do you do that? So what I do is I use browser extensions and then open the PDF file in the browser. Look up audio reading extensions for whatever browser you're using and do it that way. There's a whole bunch of different extensions for different browsers, so just find the one that sounds like someone you like. Next question, any favorite Tuhu songs? I like the classical style renditions of Maris's song. Next question, what are some things you disagree with Hoppe on? Okay, so this might sound a little bit weird, but it's on democracy. So Hans Hermann Hoppe hates democracy, whereas I just simply dislike democracy. I will at least be willing to acknowledge the fact that liberal democracy has given some people a life that they prefer and enjoy. I personally think that we can do better than democracy, and I think a big problem centering around the democracy debate is whenever you say you don't like democracy, everybody immediately assumes that your position must be some kind of totalitarian dictatorship, when in reality the question is more like, do you honestly think that liberal democracy is the absolute best that humanity can ever come up with and do? That's the real question that needs to be asked on democracy. Next question, if you could have a second channel that isn't related to politics, what would it be about? Everything except politics, pretty much. But probably more media critique, like video games and TV media and whatnot, which would technically in some ways still be political, but whatever, you get my idea. Next question, do you think there are regulations that I need for human society to work better? My specific question is, for example, central planning, walkable cities, and not allowing loud cars, etc. in places where people walk. So this is actually why I prefer privatized cities and covenant communities, because that's where something like this can actually be solved. And interestingly enough, we actually have proof of concepts to this. For instance, if you look at a mall, that's technically an example of a privately owned walkable city. The thing is, it's actually public central planning that made it so that their cities were less walkable. Anyways, next question. Thoughts on Joshua Reed Equal and Project Liberal? Oh boy, that one. Equal is one of those people where almost everything he says is either based or totally wrong, with very little in between. But I don't really care for Project Liberal because all I see it as is a way to kind of try and grab libertarians away from libertarianism and move them to more or less something that just kind of cucks the Democratic Party. I'm overall pretty unimpressed by it. Next question, what are your thoughts on the Blame America First crowd? Initial hindrance, yet again. Next question, I think I already mentioned my lay, so I will go with, what's your opinion on the Imperator Knight? Tick History. I think I've mentioned this before. Tick History has some decent content, even though I don't agree with him on everything. I do recommend his videos on National Socialists actually being socialists. It's one of the bigger red pills one can swallow. And one that severely makes leftists seethe, because their only answer to it is, no, it's not the academic consensus, because they can't actually refute the reasoning that Tick used. A lot of them have tried, but it ends up just being nitpick fallacy after nitpick fallacy after nitpick. Next question. Favorite Tuhu game and why? So this is going to sound like a weird answer because it's technically not an official game at all. But the answer is I actually really enjoy Fumo Racing just because you can edit the gravity and a whole bunch of other stuff just to do crazy stuff. I know it's kind of a dumb game, and I know it's not a shmup, but it's ridiculous as heck. You can do crazy stuff like having 100 Fumos on track with 10% friction. It's really stupid, but it's the good kind of stupid. Next question, what do you do when your country is doomed politically due to extreme midwinterian government and bad policies that can't really be undone? Ireland, by the way. I am so sorry. I'm actually an Irish American. It's sad to hear that Ireland has kind of fallen in the way of many countries over there in Europe have fallen. And the sad part is I don't believe there's a silver bullet answer to this question. I am personally doing what I can do to try and stop the collapse by exposing the propaganda and hoping that if enough people become aware of it, there might be something we can do to stop it. It's probably going to end up being a lot more complicated than that. Sorry, there's just no straight answer to the midwit problem. Next question. You've said many times that the copyright system in America is a common tool used to create and maintain monopolies and thus needs to either be changed or gotten rid of. But what are some of the things we could do to achieve this goal? Well, first is just coming up with arguments that at least the conservatives can understand about it, because a lot of times just general Republican conservatives still strongly are in favor of the current copyright system, and they don't realize that the current copyright system actually severely favors leftists. And what's funny is most leftists don't realize this either, because there's actually a lot more leftists out there who are in favor of just completely abolishing intellectual property, and they don't realize that it actually goes against their own ideology. Next question. I think these would be fun to answer. Which of your beliefs is the most divisive among your peers? Probably the fact that I'm not for open borders. That one tends to irritate the more centrist libertarians. Or in other words, the ones who reject HOPPA. As long as you have a welfare state, you can't really get rid of borders without screwing the economy over. You have to get rid of the welfare state first. And preferably abolish civil rights, at the very least. Next question, what are some Austrian economics books you've read and any particular books you'd recommend to read in general? I've read a lot of HOPPA and Rothbard, but I'll recommend a very quick and easy one to read. It's very few pages, and that's What Must Be Done by Hans Hermann Hoppe. Just to give everybody an easy read that kind of serves as an introduction to the type of thought. Next up, why so many libertarians, especially American ones, hold almost far-right and isolationist positions? Read Hans Hermann Hoppe on getting libertarianism right, and you will find out. Next question, how and why did Fumos become such a meme in the right-wing libertarian space? It's probably mostly my fault. And what enticed you to meet them? Honestly, they're just funny and smug, but it's also because the creator of Tuhu, Zune, has a really open-minded policy towards how he allows other people to use his characters. To put it simply, Zune lets other people use his Tuhu characters so long as you don't try to license them. So for instance, as long as you don't try to claim that you commercially own Reimu as a character, Zune is okay with other people making games with Reimu in it. It's a bit more complicated than that, and there's a document out there where he writes what his terms are. But to put it simply, he has a free market approach to how other people are allowed to use Tuhu. That's actually part of the reason why there's so many fan games and fan art of Tuhu, because Zune lets people do it. Which is honestly brilliant marketing strategy on his part, because to be perfectly frank, some of the earlier Tuhu games are kinda mid at best, and being open with his IP actually made it so Zune gained a lot more popularity than he otherwise would have. Anyway, next question. You once held a community post poll on possible video ideas a while back, with one of the options being kinky conspiracy theories. You ended up doing the other videos listed in that poll, but to my knowledge, not the aforementioned one. Any plans to do that one? Yes, and technically I already have been doing it. So what I did was I realized and decided that refuting tankies is not quite the same thing as refuting BreadTube. There's enough ideological difference between those people that it kind of serves its own playlist. So if you look at my playlist, you'll now notice that there is a refuting tankies section that I just created for the Holodomor video, and I've also retroactively added my videos in response to Second Thought in that playlist as well. I should probably change the thumbnail on it too, because it's honestly not that good of a thumbnail. And yeah, I'll probably make more videos to add to there in the future. One thing I'm considering is the North Korean Utopia conspiracy theory, which is a really funny, takey conspiracy where they cope about North Korea and try to say that it's not that bad of a place, guys. Trust us. It's pretty silly and unhinged. Next question. Do you think Fuxine should be required to attend school? That's really just a question of privatization of school, really. That's just a reason to support school choice. Just something a lot of libertarians and conservatives actually agree on. How would you go about reducing the size and reach of the government besides some ultra-constitution document? Privatize everything, is the general gist of it. Also, the more people who are educated on the fact that government generally just makes everything worse, the better and easier it is to actually accomplish that. The main thing people need to understand in the short run is reducing taxation and limiting their budget more and more and more. If you can keep doing that, you can eventually just shrink their power to meaninglessness. Next question, how would you feel if mosquitoes were used to administer a DNA-altering drug which would induce macromastia amongst the female population in subsequent generations? Dude, bro. Yeah. So next question, which books or authors would you recommend for someone who is starting into politic and economic literature? I've already mentioned it many times before, but Getting Libertarianism Right is a really important book to read because it makes people understand why libertarianism and right-wing conservatism are two things that actually fit together quite nicely, to the point where they actually need each other to work. The reason why I like Hoppe a lot is because he's one libertarian who pretty handedly debunked the idea that libertarianism is compatible with leftism in any way. It's pretty rock-solid explanation for why you need to exile the communists in order for a free market society to work. Next question, what is your college education? Bachelor's. But to be honest, even if I had no degree, it wouldn't really matter, because here's the thing about education. Anybody who is truly educated, and this is going to sound a little bit snobbish, but anyone who's really educated knows that you have to be an autodidact to be truly educated. Did I take economics courses in college? Yes, I did. But just about everything I know comes from knowledge I learned after college or before college. To be able to truly understand a topic, you really have to be able to teach yourself and do a deep dive into the sort of smorgasbord of ideas that are out there. Even top college courses like from Yale barely swim below the surface. And this is also just kind of a general explanation for why credentialism is so dumb. Thinking that someone's knowledge is dictated by the amount of shiny papers they possess is one of the heights of midwittery. Next question, why are manhole covers round? Isn't that really dumb question that they sometimes ask in silly interviews for jobs where you're not actually going to be doing anything of value? Yeah, it is. Everybody knows the answer to that one. It doesn't even serve its purpose anymore. You can look it up on Google. Next question. What are your interests other than FUMOs, economics, memes, and video games? I like hiking. That's actually one of the reasons why I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, because it's a beautiful area. Politics in this area, not so much. But it is really hard to beat the great outdoors here. Next question, how do you go about researching your videos? Do you use a fixed strategy or does it vary by topic? I try to use rationalism to understand as much as I can, but obviously I need to do research on certain things sometimes if it's something I'm not entirely familiar with already, and I prefer to use online libraries for it. And another trick is that when you want to use academic or research papers, a lot of times you don't actually need to have JSTOR access in order to get to those papers. A lot of times you can just search for the paper name, and one of the authors or the researchers involved with that paper will have posted it on their own website, or it'll be posted for free on a university somewhere else. You can access a lot of scientific papers if you know what you're doing pretty easily. Another one I'll sometimes use is Scholarpedia. Next question, what's your opinion on bio-Leninism, true or hogwash? Oh boy. Bio-Leninism, it has some truth to it, although I'm pretty sure society would collapse long before it. It is entirely possible to create a society based on leftism that greatly encourages people who don't know what they're doing to reproduce, while encouraging people who do know what they're doing to not reproduce. That's just kind of a general issue of wealth transfer, and it is absolutely a possible consequence of following the equity fallacy to its logical conclusion. But again, I think things will collapse long before you actually have a chance to verify if it's true or not. And will there ever be a refuting BreadTube Destiny video? I mean, I kind of already did that in some ways. It's just that Destiny isn't really a BreadTuber. He kind of sits on the edge between a general liberal and BreadTube. He kind of has the same problem as Equal does, but much, much worse, in that he'll say something that it goes against or calls out the woke progressives for being silly and dumb, and then in the very next breath he'll say something that just provides unconditional surrender to their ideology. And that's just kind of how left liberalism as an ideology is in general. Next question, how should AI be used in a practical sense? Image AI, chat GPT, etc. So a funny thing about image AI so far is that to a degree, the free market is already fixing the problem that a lot of artists are complaining about, in that a lot of people don't like AI art and would rather have the real thing and pay for the real thing anyways. This, of course, will not stop the governments from sweeping in and passing a bunch of really stupid regulations and then pretending like they saved the day. But yeah, so far AI is something I am cautiously optimistic towards. And as for me, I use it sometimes in my videos when I can't find a good real image to use, which is probably the most responsible way to use AI, but some people still don't like it, so whatever. Next question, any detailed thoughts on the channels like Academic Agent, Aaron McIntyre, and other potentially NRX ones? So the thing about a lot of the NRX types and a lot of the post-libertarian types is that they're basically still libertarians in just about every sense of the word. I believe there was a talk between Aaron McIntyre and Dave Smith where it was revealed that McIntyre actually agrees with libertarians on just about everything. They just don't identify as libertarian anymore, so that way they can get away with being pragmatic when they want to be, without having to try and defend it when they do. Which is kind of lazy, but it is what it is. Next question, what's your favorite firearm ever? The revolver. Next question. Question is largely on covenant communities and how you mentioned them as an ideal form of governance, and I wanted to know how a nation that's a series of such communities would handle military, and if there are any historical examples of such a system working. Thank you. So that's a good question. It comes real close to requiring its own video, but the basic gist of it is as long as there are large aggressive states, Unfortunately, smaller Covenant communities would have to have some form of defense contract between each other in order to actually defend themselves from the large aggressive entity, which is not ideal and does suck, but there's really no way of getting around it. And as for an example of it working, technically the Wild West, although they never really needed to use it. So I'm not sure if that counts. Next question, won't be able to make it, but I want to say I love the Holodomor video. Well, glad you enjoyed it. In case anyone's wondering, yes, there will be a follow-up to that video. It's actually kind of funny because I was already initially planning on making a follow-up to it, where the entire point would be defending using Applebaum instead of Tauger. And Bad Panda Win instantly responded to it and basically used the Tauger argument that I was already planning on following up to and refuting. Which is really weird, because I knew that Tauger would happen eventually, I just didn't expect it to happen that fast. Next question. We all know that your process of becoming more and more libertarian was gradual, but what was the moment or event that made you change the most? That's just the realization that liberalism has no answer to communism, and no real answer to woke leftist identity politics either. Even conservative liberalism doesn't really have a way to stop it. Liberalism inherently privileges whoever is able to claim victim status, regardless of whether or not it is true. You can convince enough invalids to vote for it, you can do it and violate people's property rights. It is inherently a slow march towards slavery. Next question, what is your opinion on classical liberalism? Well, it's the better version of liberalism. It's still a slow march, but it can be preserved for quite a long time if the people within it are aware of the problems about liberalism in general. This is something a lot of conservative liberals need to understand. If they want to try their best to conserve liberalism and not go along with what I'm saying, then you need to, at the very, very least, go back to 1920s. And yes, that means abolishing civil rights and abolishing the Equal Pay Act and abolishing all those entitlements and welfare. Of course, the problem is I just don't think the people alive today are really willing to do that. It's just too hard of a pill for them to swallow that just about everything liberalism has done in the last 100 years has just been a slow suicide. Question, broad question, but any thoughts on post-liberalism? So post-liberalism, that's a word that just has too many different meanings, because technically post-liberalism can mean anybody who's no longer a liberal and believes in something beyond liberalism. So for instance, technically I am a post-liberal, but also tankies can even call themselves post-liberal, so it's not a really good term to always use without being specific. Because of course, tankies and myself disagree with each other on just about everything, but we can also both technically use the term post-liberal. So next question, what do you think of MMT? It's a scam. It's a result of people not understanding what money really is. Again, I could recommend MRH Legacy for that one. Next question, since in one of your videos you mentioned being close to Portland, Oregon, what do you think about the rest of the state? A lot of the rest of the state is actually pretty darn sane, except for Eugene. I mean, if you just go as far away as from Portland as Beaverton, people are instantly less progressive. Beaverton is still progressive, but not nearly as much as Portland. Next question, favorite mech from fiction? Jehuti. Next up, do you watch anime, and if so, what's your favorite anime? I do, but I consider most of it bad. So take that to mean what you will. My favorite would be Akira. It's just that anime is usually preferable to woke trash, but on the flip side has its own problems. And as for anything I'd want to see adapted, this will be a little controversial, but I would like to see the entirety of 3x3 Eyes actually given a proper adaptation. Next question, what is your favorite color? Just thinking it's still good. Silver. That may be an odd answer, but I like it. Anyway, next question. Another multi-one. Any other hobbies? Frisbee golf. Next question. Are you into astronomy? Sort of. I mean, I kind of like it, but I'm not into it enough to have a favorite telescope or anything. But I do find it interesting, but just from a casual consumer perspective. Next question. If you know your IQ, what is it? I know what it is. It's above 2 standard deviations, but I don't want to say the exact number. See, the problem with IQ is, first off, stating your IQ by number. I think the people who do that are committing the same error as people who get obsessed with credentialism. Just a different form of credentialism because it doesn't actually tell you everything. IQ mostly measures your reasoning speed and how you learn, really. It does have pretty good predictive properties, but it doesn't tell you everything. For instance, IQ doesn't necessarily measure intellectual honesty. I have absolutely met some high IQ individuals who could prove that they had a high IQ, and they were into some crazy cult nonsense, because it gave them good feels. So in other words, having a high IQ helps, but it doesn't make you immune to stupidity, if that makes any sense. Next question, what do you think of fat acceptance and physiognomy? I'm not entirely sold on physiognomy, but fat acceptance is one of the absolute stupidest ideologies out there. Very dumb, everyone should lift. Next question, what are your favorite video games? The games I've liked were probably mostly, I like StarCraft, I've liked Shinobi 3. My favorite was Tribes. I also used to like arena shooters like Unreal Tournament a lot. Played a lot of Half-Life Deathmatch back in the day as well. Not so much Quake, though. Always liked Unreal Tournament more than Quake for some reason. Next up, what is your favorite restaurant? There's this hole in the wall called Gyro to Go that I like. I like gyros. Very tasty. But if you just mean generic schlop, probably Red Robin. Good burgers, infinite fries, not too expensive. Next question, what metric do you think best represents the health and size of an economy? There isn't really one metric that you can use to find that, because all of them can be fudged in one way or another depending on how the country is run. But usually a combination of economic freedom and nominal GDP will give you a good idea of the better countries to live in. Next question, who is your favorite political commentator? None of them. I don't really watch any of them. Yep, that's right. I'm assuming you mean mainstream media political commentators, the famous ones that people would actually know offhand. I don't watch any of them. None of them, sorry. I am completely unimpressed by all of them. At least the ones that you can turn a TV on and have a chance of seeing them. Next question, what is your current stance on the video game industry as a whole? Going down the tubes, pretty much. And it's not just because of the woke trash. A lot of the times, the real issue is just casualization of gameplay. I haven't seen a game be decently challenging in a very long time. For instance, I recently got into Guild Wars 2 and tried playing PvE, and it's brain dead. It's so easy. They designed the mobs in that game for people who apparently suffer from some kind of disability. So you have to play PvP to have any kind of enjoyment. It's kind of sad, really. 30XX is pretty good, though, which is why I'm playing it for this. This one actually lets you edit the difficulty, which is pretty sweet. I think I'm playing the game on +4 difficulty right now or something. Whatever, though, it doesn't matter. Really, it's just whatever you find fun. I find games more fun if they're actually challenging. If you like casual games, sure, you do you, whatever. Just not for me. Next up, give your take on the recent feud between Walter Block and Hans Hermann Hoppe. Oh boy, that one. So I think a lot of people confused my take on Israel and Palestine for giving Israel a free pass. I was not. I was just pointing out the silly reasons for why leftists support Palestine and why those reasons are just kind of based on leftist racism. But that doesn't automatically make Israel completely in the right either. In fact, I actually agree that the amount of tax funding that the United States should be using to give Israel any kind of funding or aid should be zero. Yep, that's right, $0. So for the most part, I agreed with Hoppe's take. The correct libertarian position is that we should be calling for a ceasefire and not funding the war in any way. We should be calling for peaceful negotiation if possible, and $0 to anybody. That also includes no aid to Palestine. Just in case anyone was wondering if I switched up on that. No. Because I've seen some lefty takes where they're saying that we should be sending aid to Palestine instead. No money to either of them. No. And Hoppe is completely correct to call them both gangsters. The only thing I would disagree with Hoppe on his take there, is I don't think there's as many Palestinians who actually have a provable deed to any specific plot of land as Hoppe seems to think there is. I think very few of them actually have that, they just say that they do. Anyways, next question. Here's an extremely important quote. Who's your favorite Tuhu? I've said this before, it's Marisa. And yes, admittedly, part of it's just the gold and black, but also her super move is the funnest to use. It's just a big, giant laser. Can't go wrong. Most iconic spell card in the game. Next question. What is your favorite animal? Tiger, which is also the year I was born in, if you go by the Chinese years anyway. Next question. Do you believe in no hymen, no diamond? I think that one depends on how old you are. At my age, that's a little bit unrealistic. What I think matters more is loyalty. I would say no loyalty, no diamond. If a woman shows any sign of fooling around with other guys at all, I would say no, not a keeper. In this day and age, unfortunately, a woman can pretty much ruin her own marriage by cheating on her man, getting a divorce, and then collecting alimony while still fooling around with her affair. It doesn't happen as often as some red pillars will say it happens, but it does happen. And the fact that our clown world Western laws allows any woman to potentially do it, you basically have to say no diamond to any woman where there's even a slightest hint of a chance that she might do that. So that's my take on that matter. No loyalty, no diamond. Next question. Where did you get your economics knowledge? Autodeduction. How would you suggest to learn about economics? Autodeduction. So here's the thing. A lot of mainstream economics courses you'll take in college are crap. And depending on which school you go to, mixed with lots of propaganda. If you want to really learn about economics, it's time to hit the books. Next question, would a national socialist economy work? No, because they actually are socialists. Again, check out Tick History's video on that. Very big red pill. Also another reason why you should not be a Wignot. Next question, are you pro or anti-intellectual property? Love your content, by the way, keep it up. Well, thanks. Anti-intellectual property. And it's important to point out that doesn't mean I don't think artists should be credited, or that they shouldn't earn money. It's just that you don't actually need IP laws to do it. As well as just the fact that, on principle, IP laws create an artificial scarcity that doesn't need to exist. Next question, do you think a monarchy would be better than our current system? Okay, so that's a good one. That depends on what kind of monarchy. A monarchy exactly like those far in the distant past? Sure. Or how about a libertarian monarchy mixed with freehold and capitalism? Definitely. However, the problem comes in, and this is one thing that Hoppe is actually slightly wrong about, that any monarchy that we would try to create today, or any kind of monarchy that would come into existence today, has a very dangerously high chance of actually ending up being a socialist or communist dictatorship style monarchy. Kind of like what you see in either North Korea or Turkmenistan. Not exactly places that I would want to live. Next question, what's your general belief on abortion? Do you hold to Zulu's evictionism? Evictionism is definitely better than deathism. Honestly, on the whole abortion debate, one thing that annoys me is that the libertarian side is really what seems like really the only ones who understand what the question's really about. It's basically a property rights conflict, which means that evictionism is automatically the best answer. The difference, though, is are you a pro-life evictionist or are you a pro-death evictionist? The question of can a woman eject the baby from her body without killing it? In other words, early term abortion, because you don't really have a way of saving the child then. At least yet, anyways. That's the conversation people should really be having. Next question. Congrats. Well, thank you. And this question stems from two of your videos. One of them, civil rights. Yes, my civil rights. So here's my question. You made a compelling case against the Civil Rights Act and its role in forming our modern problem of positive discrimination against race, sex, etc. That all being said, would you think a Civil Rights Act that would clearly outlaw both negative discrimination and positive discrimination? No. I see where you're going here. Outlawing both negative and positive. I can see the utilitarian angle you're going with that. But no, that would just make things even worse because there's no real viable praxis to determine if that's actually happening. That would just create an even bigger mess because now the state would have to be given pretty high powers of surveillance in order to even make sure that's happening. That's part of the reason why disparate impact came to be of the negative discrimination, because there really is no other way for it to even be enforceable. So the only way you could potentially also outlaw positive discrimination is not really by outlawing it, but abolishing disparate impact. But if you do that, it also just makes it so that civil rights stops making any sense, because now you have a crime that there's no way to prove it either way. And honestly, just telling businesses who they can and cannot hire on a voluntary basis is silly. It's dumb. It's unnecessary. It's better to just abolish civil rights outright. Good question, though. I'm glad you asked it, but no. Next up, love your content. Thanks. Glad you enjoy it. Do economies that exchange multiple different currencies, dollars, cryptocurrency, precious metals, etc., function better than an economy that exchanges fiat currency such as the Federal Reserve central bank system or gold certificates? Yes, money is just as good as any other, and having currencies compete for which is the most viable and trustworthy is a good thing, for pretty much the same reasons that competition in anything else is a good thing. I've seen some utilitarians say, oh, well, that'll create a mess in the economy because people won't be able to buy goods with their certain currencies. But the thing is, with crypto, we've kind of already seen that that's not really true. Most places that accept crypto accept the most common types of crypto, and it's extremely easy to exchange currencies for other currencies. So multiple currencies is a good thing. They should compete for stability and value. Next question. Would you rather choose the girls from Toho that have hats or the ones without hats? I'll go with hats. Hats always good. More hats. And Team Fortress 2 is also a game I played back in the long days ago. So definitely hats. Hats, yes. Next question. What is your favorite economic think tanks and thoughts on particular ones, such as AAR, Heritage Foundation? They're okay-ish. They could be better. Cato, again, okay-ish. They could be better. Manhattan, AEI. Well, my favorite one is Mises, obviously. So that answers your question. And the rest are just occasionally useful. Next question. What is one bad idea that originated specifically from the lib right? Oh no, I have to say it. Liberalism. The original liberalism, anyways, was kind of our idea. Oh well, as time goes on, we learn, and humanity just keeps doing the best it can. Anyways, next question. What are your thoughts on the future of the LP? I guess you mean Libertarian Party. Does it have a future? I think it has a future that I just think that libertarians need to do a better job selling their ideas. Too many libertarians get caught up in ridiculous infighting and the specifics of natural law, ethics, and philosophy and whatnot, and just general purity spiraling, especially with what's kind of happening now with the whole open borders, closed borders argument. A lot of purity spiraling going on there. Libertarians need to focus a bit more on the younger generation and focus a bit more on what libertarianism actually gives society. We need to focus more on explaining why having a free market ultimately makes everybody richer and leads to an overall much better quality of life. We need to focus less on infighting and more on calling out all the lies, propaganda, and corruption that goes on in the government. Because the leftists on the economic side, they do a great job explaining this. They're wrong, of course, but they have a very easy sell. They'll just say, capitalism bad, and we'll give you the stuff that you want for free. It's stupid and economically unfeasible, but it works because people buy into it because they like how that sounds. And the Libertarian Party needs to take a step back and look at that strategy and realize why it has worked. and then apply our own counter-propaganda strategy. Next question, have you ever played any of the original Bullet Hell Touhou games, and if yes, then which one is your favorite? I actually have. I played the number 6. Unless you mean the original PC 98 games of 1 to 5, which are considered pretty different from the main canon, I have not played those. I played a demake of the first game. There's a fan-made Windows port of it, but I haven't actually played the official PC 98 ones. I should probably set up some PC 98 emulation, because a lot of those games are actually pretty good. Anyway, next question. Is it actually smart to make senators and such have their income be the absolute average of the country they rule in? Not really, because they have ways of getting around it. It's kind of pointless. It's an attempt, but it doesn't really do anything. Most members of Congress make their money through investment. It's a bit more complicated than that, but the TLDR explanation is that they invest in the companies that they're subsidizing so that they know that the investment will work, which is, of course, completely corrupt. But when you give people that kind of power over the economy, that's what they'll do. Corruption is just the logical conclusion of central planning. There's really no way of getting around that, other than just not having any central planning at all. Next up, what are your thoughts on 1984, and are you planning to do a video analysis on it where you would explain what did Orwell get right and what did he get wrong? Sort of. I probably won't do a major deep dive video analysis on that video. I'm kind of a subscriber to the belief that what we're really seeing in this day and age is kind of a combination of 1984 and A Brave New World, where all the plebs are being placated just enough that they don't realize that the state is inching them closer to 1984. So it's kind of a weird combination of censorship, fear, and bread and circuses that is being used to take over people's freedoms. I don't think that fear alone can work. I think in order for a state to efficiently control people, they have to control all their emotions. Next question, do you think mass immigration is an existential threat to the West? Sort of. The issue with mass immigration isn't so much the concept of immigration itself. You can have immigration and it works. The problem is how it's being used. In order to maintain a free market, you have to maintain a culture that actually cares about a free market. And what a lot of politicians are doing right now, and basically as a way to sort of earn more power for themselves without really caring what happens to their country, is that they're supporting these immigration policies of bringing in these third world migrants who have no skills and no idea what they're doing whatsoever, and then of course getting them immediately hooked on the welfare state and more free stuff. So that way they will grow up and their next generation will vote for those who give them more welfare state and more free stuff. And of course the obvious problem is that's not economically sustainable. Eventually, as the West keeps doing that, as Western countries, both the United States and UK and the rest of Europe, as long as they're doing that, it's eventually just going to fail. And it's not going to be fun for the people living either, because socialism generally tends to create low-trust societies, and multiculturalism, where the different cultures have radically different ideas of ethics, also generally tends to create low-trust societies. So you're going to have a combination of both of those things, and it's just not going to work. And you'll know it's near the end when the knuckleheads in power start seriously going after farmers. That tends to be a common theme throughout history, is socialist idiocy always ends in blaming the farmers, and then they adopt policies that start making people starve that just completely collapses the economy. Next question, what's your opinion on 6-hour workdays becoming the norm in somewhere in the future, or more specifically, the libertarian response to this, agree or not? I think that's not really going to matter, because the advent of AI is just going to make it so pretty soon the free market is just going to choose more part-time work and gig work as just being the norm for people. That is assuming we don't economically collapse before then. Next question, where should I start off if I want to get into Touhou? I heard the 7th game is pretty easy. I haven't actually played it though. There's also a Metroidvania called Luna Nights, I believe, which is, from what I've heard, pretty good. I might just get it and then play it for a future game rant. Next question, given the state of the public school system, do you think libertarian ideas of education show untapped potential for the growth of the movement among Gen Zers? Yes, the public school system doing badly and just being outperformed by charter schools and private schools is definitely a pretty obvious sell to the younger generation of the difference between public and private, and how public systems don't really have the same free choice check on them to make sure they're not going in a completely insane direction that private does. Next question, would you do a video on Infrared since he is unique among lefties? Oh boy, Infrared. He's definitely the most interesting of the tankies, I will give him that. In a way though, Hoppa's works alone pretty much refute his entire ideology. Wokeness is just a logical conclusion of victimhood, and communism just naturally creates victimhood as the way for it to justify its existence. That's just kind of the general problem with Knotzbold style of thinking. It holds beliefs which have contradictory logical conclusions. ML's moving more and more towards using woke progressive idpol was entirely organic. It's just where your beliefs and class conflict will eventually lead you. That wasn't a subversion of Marxism like Infrared likes to say, it's just where it goes. Next question. Hello, Mentis. Love your content. Thank you. What is your general opinion of What If Alt Hist's content and predictions? What If Alt Hist? He's okay. He's had some trips and bad takes in the past, but the thing is, he's a zoomer from what I understand, and so being wrong on some random things is kind of forgivable. And as for his predictions, the one where he goes on collapse, that's just kind of a maybe. I think the collapse is likely, but it's not absolutely guaranteed. I think at least in the United States, if conservatives and libertarians can find things that we agree on, particularly getting conservatives to finally acknowledge that everything we've been saying and warning them about in the last 30 years or so is basically coming true, we may be able to find some strategy to turn the ship around. I do think it kinda banks on the next election, though, for United States, unfortunately. If the Dems manage to get some twat like Kamala Harris in charge, and she ends up being the next president of the United States, very unlikely to happen, but let's just say her or someone like her, then I think we'll have reached a point of no return. I think if the United States can't manage to get someone in who cares and respects the free market this election, and especially if we just get another really silly woke patsy, or other mindless establishment puppet, then yeah, the collapse is coming. I don't think we can recover from another 4 years of slow socialist suicide because we are definitely reaching the end on that. I'm fairly certain that either Kamala or someone similar to her is absolutely deranged enough to pull the blame farmers card, and again, when you see that, that is the end. That is when you know you really need to prep for the collapse if you haven't already. Next question. Thoughts on the chances of the Libertarian Party becoming a major player in US politics? Well, there's a chance. But again, libertarians need to learn how to talk to the common people more directly. For instance, one thing people may or may not notice about me is I am not a utilitarian, but I will often give utilitarian explanations for why something is a good idea because I know that the average person can associate with that. The normies understand utilitarian ethics. You could go into in-depth philosophy on natural law all day, and you will be technically correct. The problem is that a lot of people just won't understand what you're saying. Next question, opinion on the Electoral College. So as some people may know, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of democracy, and obviously not really a big fan of the Electoral College as a result. However, I will say that democracy with an Electoral College is better than direct democracy. It's better than the true democracy. True democracy is honestly just completely insane. You can easily just end up with this situation where one overpopulated city and whatever culture they have ends up dictating everything for the rest of a massive country. And that's very stupid because people living in that city aren't going to know how life and culture and society is for people living, say, 1,000 miles away in a farmer town or something like that. So the way the Electoral College works in the United States, at least, is it does somewhat require people to, or I should say require politicians to cast their net a little bit wider than just focusing on Los Angeles and New York. Mainly it caps the support for any one state at 50%, which makes it so that pandering to any one specific cultural group eventually has diminishing returns. So for instance, a politician doesn't have the incentive to pander to, say, Californian sensibilities beyond around 60% in a way that would make them less popular elsewhere in the country because they already have the support they need. And that to some degree makes them look at the rest of the country. It's not a good system. Ranked voting would be better. No democracy would be a lot better, or at the very least limited democracy to landowners only. But I would say the Electoral College is better than just a true free-for-all democracy. True full democracies are stupid. Next question. Thoughts on the Bad Panda response to my response to criticize your reliance on journalists instead of scholars and claimed you mistakenly viewed UN definition of genocide. Oh boy. Yep, the Bad Panda question. Kind of already touched on that. The thing you have to realize about tankies in general is that they'll sometimes come up with responses that sound relatively convincing, and the reason they do that is because they're just very comfortable with lying. That's the main difference between the tanky types and the more liberal socialist types. They both tend to lie a little bit, but tankies are in general 100 times more comfortable with lying. For instance, a simple sneak preview of one of the things I'll point out is that his criticism of Applebaum not being a historian and just being a journalist, that's just a flat-out lie. She graduated from Yale University, she got her degree in history, and she studied under Wolfgang, actually, who was a very popular historian and expert on the Soviet Union. What tankies do is they point out the fact that she's done journalist work, and then they'll just lie and say she's not a historian because she's done some journalist work, which is ridiculous because you absolutely can be both a journalist and a historian. And it was even sillier because even if it was true, it would just be a stupid credentialist argument. So not only is it a dumb credentialist argument, but it's a incorrect, dishonest twist of a credentialist argument, making it just double stupid. But hey, I guess all that matters with tankies is that if they're able to tell lies with a straight look on their face, then they get a pass. It's very ridiculous, and I'll go over it in my follow-up video. Next question, opinion on console homebrew. Very based. I really like how the homebrew community is able to keep alive certain consoles from just a bygone age. ROM hacks are also fun. Some people may have noticed that actually some of the games I've played for my gamer rants were in fact slight ROM hacks. For instance, when I played Mega Man X, I was actually playing a ROM hack that slightly ups the difficulty and also gives you the X2 version of the dash, which fixes a lot of bugs in the game. Which is nice, because back in the day, they didn't really have bug fix patches. There was no online updater for the Super Nintendo. Whatever they shipped on those cartridges, that was just the game back in the days. But nowadays, people can fix those bugs in ROM hacks of games 30, 40 years ago. And you can even play them on original hardware if you have something like an SD to SNES. So yeah, something fun to do. Next question, what is your opinion on SFO? And would you be willing to do live stream a conversation with him in the future? I mean, I'd be willing to do it if he comes to me and asks me to do it. As for my opinion of him, he's one of those people who are on the sort of enlightened, slightly right-leaning centrist takes, where he has some good takes and he has some good videos, but the problem is he tries too hard to stay an enlightened centroid, and that sometimes leads to him giving in to the leftist ideals that he was earlier talking against. He does seem like a chill guy, though, at least. He's one of those people who I would hang out with and be friends with, even if we don't agree with on everything. Next question, why do you feel that libertarians rarely vote, well, libertarian? The answer to that is very simple, at least in the United States, because our voting system is broken. It is intentionally designed to favor the two-party system. It encourages people to not actually vote for the person they want. Next question, are there any good breadtuber that you would recommend, or all of them bad? Pretty much all of them bad. The only ones that I would consider not always bad are the ones that aren't really breadtubers. For instance, Destiny occasionally has some good takes, but he's not really a breadtuber in my book. He's just a really standard left-leaning liberal. He's just a left version of Short Fat Otaku, actually. So I can't really consider him a breadtuber. Breadtubers are specifically those who simp for any version of libertarian socialism, which is an insane contradiction because you can't actually get rid of hierarchies. So basically all of them are bad because the core foundation of their ideology is self-contradictory. You're just not really going to get good takes from a community that starts out with 2 + 2 = 5. It just doesn't work that way. Next question, what are your thoughts on H Bomber Guy? His content doesn't seem terrible, but I believe he shares the same dogma as most breadtubers. H Bomber Guy's content is honestly pretty much content free. People keep recommending him for refuting breadtubers video, and yet nothing he says is of any interest whatsoever. All he does is just kind of toe the party line while squealing like a little girl. I don't get it. I don't understand why his content is popular and so liked. For instance, his latest video on plagiarism, I tried watching that and watched most of it, and it was just mostly things that everybody already knew. Or at least if you were paying attention, you kind of already knew it. And he could have easily condensed the actual points that he was making into far less time, without actually sacrificing any information. But on the flip side, I mean, what would I even have to say about it besides what I just said? He's very style over substance. There's actually really not much there to even refute. That wouldn't at least come across as pedantic on my part. So I'll just leave it to one word. Meh. That is my thoughts on H Bomber Guy. Meh. Next question, can we have a minute to appreciate how Panda's entire comment section's only takeaway point from his response is that, yes, you like to use memes. Well, yeah, they're just jealous because they can't meme. That's pretty much it. They can't meme, so they're jealous of those who meme. It really is that simple. Next questions. I'll go with 3 since I've kind of already answered the other 2 here. One of the many arguments breadtubers have these days is that capitalism and individualism are tied to loneliness and depression. How would you refute it? That one's just kind of refuted by basic history of socialist and communist regimes. Communism creates an extremely low-trust society, which actually makes those problems much, much, much worse. What breadtubers are actually doing here is that they're just blaming issues of cultural decline on capitalism because blame capitalism for everything is their rhetoric. They don't actually understand the process or inner workings or how any of these things are happening. Next question. Do you own any Fumo plushes? Yes, I do, because they are useful for memes. Next question. What are your positions regarding Georgism and land value tax? I consider it the least bad tax, although it's still technically bad. Georgism would probably more or less be a minarchist compromise with libertarians. For instance, a Georgist democracy is not an ideal system, but it does provide the simplest way for democracy to not be completely terrible, in that it would have a land value tax and only the land value is taxed, but then you would have only the landowners who are paying that tax are allowed to vote. That again is not what I view as the ideal system, but it would be something that classical liberal types could do in an attempt to turn back the clock to something that's at least a little bit more sane, and less walking towards decline like the current clown system we have. Next question is, do you read the latest comments on your recent videos? I do try to read as many comments as I can. I wish I had the time to respond to everything, but unfortunately reality doesn't work like that. That's actually one of the only downside to having a lot more subscribers now versus say a year or two ago. I could actually go through all of the comments back then, whereas now if I tried to do that I wouldn't have time to make videos. I do definitely like to stick around and read the first comments to my videos though. I can still pretty much always do that. I think even if I get really big I'll still be able to do that. I mean, just respond to some of the first bird comments, why not? That's always fun to do. I always enjoy that, and I think the people who get there and are the first bird comments enjoy it too. So I plan to keep doing that. Next question, will you make a video that more thoroughly explains how a libertarian is truly different from a conservative in the Republican sense? That might actually be a good idea. I'll add that to the maybe pile. I think a lot of people don't realize that libertarianism is essentially a combination of economics and ethical models, and that when it agrees with Republicans, it just so happens to do so by coincidence. Because what Republicans will often do is that they will use just basic utilitarianism to reach the same conclusions that we have already reached. Plus, just right-wing economics are a lot more compatible with right-leaning conservative values as well. Just because conservative values tend to have lower time preference, and in order for a libertarian free market society to work, it would also have to have a culture that has a low time preference. So it's definitely not so much that libertarians and Republicans are the same thing. We're absolutely not. We just sometimes reach the same conclusion from different vantage points, if that makes any sense. Next question, would you rather live in the Liechtenstein or Argentina if everything went perfect for Melee? Well, if everything goes perfect for him, then Argentina is going to be a pretty sweet place to live. I would have to brush up on the Espanol, though, because it's been a while since I've used that language. But for now, I'll just wish Argentina the best. Anyway, next question. Don't know if this question's a bit personal, but have you had any friends in the past 5 to 10 years that you lost due to political beliefs? AKA friends who went off the deep with woke ideology and severed contact because of wrongthink. Yes, I had one of those, unfortunately. He was a friend I had in a Pathfinder group, and just one day he decided we were all too right-wing for him. And then he dipped, which is unfortunate, but that is his choice. I've seen it enough, especially living near Portland, Oregon, that I just try to not let it bother me. You kinda have to respect people's freedom of association, even when they're being stupid. Anyways, I don't want this video to go longer than an hour, so what I will do now is wrap this up with a little bit of frequently asked questions that'll hopefully encompass a lot of the other questions I see. So the first of those is, will you do a video on X breadtuber, some of the other breadtubers not mentioned? You can always ask that question. I have seen occasionally people recommend some breadtubers that I hadn't heard of before. The answer, unfortunately, is pretty much always maybe. The pile is big enough that they're all just kind of in a constant state of maybe. I definitely plan to do more of them, and the ones I choose to do kind of depends on the state of politics at the time. For instance, there was a few breadtubers who I was planning on doing a video on, but then they kind of fell from grace and became irrelevant, or just flat out quit, and so there's not really any point anymore. But yeah, it's a series I will definitely continue doing, for as long as their ideology remains relevant and remains a threat. Next question, merch win. Yeah, I occasionally get this in the comment section. I probably should make merch, since it would involve you guys actually getting something whenever you give money to me instead of just donating to my Ko-Fi. It would be nice to actually have a way for me to earn money from this that involves giving back as well at the same time, so that way you get a nice little product or a mug or something. I've thought about it, I've procrastinated on it, which is probably something I shouldn't be procrastinating on since it involves money. I should probably care a little bit more about that, especially since people occasionally ask me about it. So tell you what, I'll try to get something in that regards out before my next high octane video, and if I don't do it and I procrastinate it on again, feel free to pester me in the comments about it again. And the next question I keep occasionally getting is people asking me to do a video on the Unabomber. I've thought about that, but the thing is, I try not to make videos that aren't already highly overdone. I like to say things that haven't already been said. And Ted is one of those people where just about everything that can be said has already been said. My guess is people just were wondering what my take on it was because he recently passed away. But really, there's not much I could add to it. But anyways, that is all. Thanks for watching. That is all for now. There was quite a lot of other questions. Perhaps I'll do a sequel to this and have another Q&A video on top of this one. Maybe there'll be a part 2. But for now, that's all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Thanks a lot. Thanks for 50K and all that. Till next time.